Tension crackled through the lecture hall like static clinging to synthetic fabric. The Xenocultural Exchange class was supposed to be an exercise in peace, in shared understanding, but the air today felt anything but peaceful. A trio of guards in midnight black armor had taken up positions near the side entrance, each armed, though subtly. Subtly by Nukar standards meant the weapons were holstered instead of drawn. Jason McCullen noticed the shift right away. He'd been sitting 2 rows from the back, lazily sipping a synth fruit smoothie and reviewing last week's lecture notes, when the hall's temperature dropped a metaphorical 10 degrees. Even the normally melodramatic Trallebeck twins, with their frilly neck fans and compulsive humming, had fallen silent. A ripple of motion from the front doors. Then, boots. Heavy, clawed, metallic. Clank, clank, clank. Jason exhaled slowly and sat up straighter. The doors hissed open. The NCAR delegation strode in with the confidence of apex predators, and not the metaphorical kind. Each NCAR was easily over 7 feet tall, with coiled musculature under matte red scales, forearms ending in retractable talons, and eyes like polished obsidian marbles. But it wasn't the adults that stole the room. It was what they brought with them. 2 of the guards flanked a reinforced containment pod on an anti-grav dolly. The case, transparent from all sides, held what looked like a reptilian pup. Roughly the size of a medium dog, its frame was all sinew and teeth, black-sheened with tiger-striped accents of sulfur yellow. The hatchling's slit-pupilled gaze scanned the room with unblinking focus. Gasps erupted. One of the Salethi students made a noise that sounded suspiciously like a suppressed whimper. Jason didn't move. Mostly because he'd accidentally dropped his stylus and was trying not to draw attention as he fished it out from under his chair. Also, because his smoothie was very, very close to spilling. "This is a juvenile corral car," boomed the Nakar representative. "Commander Valthax, according to the morning schedule. Born and bred for hunting, dominance, and survival. We bring it here not for sport, but for education. Observe its instincts, understand what true willpower looks like." Jason raised an eyebrow. The term educational seemed generously applied. The instructor, a small, fluttery-faced Avarti named Professor Ellen, offered a nervous nod. "Yes, thank you, Commander. We welcome your contribution to today's discussion on cross-species emotional perception and social hierarchy." The dolly hissed down onto the floor. The pod disengaged with a mechanical click. The hatchling didn't bolt, it stepped out slowly, deliberately, like it had memorized the effect it was supposed to have. Several students leaned back in their seats. The twins were practically vibrating with unease. One of the Furic students emitted a glandular warning mist that smelled like scorched plastic and garlic. The Nakar had even prepared a designated seat, a low platform covered in scent-marked fabrics, carefully placed beside the most timid species in the room, the Salethi cluster. They were near translucent, all spindly limbs and jittery movement, clearly chosen for dramatic contrast. The hatchling walked in their direction, and then turned. Not toward the fear seat, not toward the NCAR or the instructors. It padded straight toward Jason. There was a moment, just a beat, where Jason wondered if he should run. The hatchling's eyes locked onto him, and every muscle in its frame seemed poised for a pounce. Instead, it stopped, and sat, right beside him. Jason blinked. The hatchling blinked back. Then it shifted its hind legs and curled up beside his chair, head tilted slightly, watching the front of the room as if awaiting instruction. When Jason leaned down, just slightly, to make sure it was real and not some holovid malfunction, the hatchling mirrored him, tilting its head in perfect synchrony. Silence. A shocked, cavernous silence. Someone in the back dropped a data pad. The sound echoed. Professor Ellen cleared her throat with what sounded like a squeak. Fascinating. It appears it has chosen an unexpected seat." "No," Commander Valthax growled. "This is not possible. It was trained to assert presence. It should dominate, not grovel." Jason glanced around, aware that every eye was now fixed on him. "I don't think it's groveling," he said carefully. "It's just sitting." The hatchling lifted its snout and made a soft, chuffing sound. Then it nudged Jason's bag with its nose. Jason instinctively pulled it away, only for the hatchling to gently tap the bag again. Valthax was now visibly agitated, baring sharp rows of carnassial teeth. "Why is it doing that?" "I don't." Jason paused, reaching into the front pouch of his bag. The hatchling's tail thumped once when he retrieved a familiar wrapper. Wait, granola bar? The tail thumped again. And suddenly, it clicked. Oh no, Jason whispered. Professor Ellen perked up. You know this animal? Jason swallowed hard, avoiding the judgmental eyes of the entire delegation. I might have met it. Last week, during the delegation's prep tour, it was in a holding crate near the mess hall. I didn't know it was that. It looked hungry. You fed it? Valthax thundered. I gave it a granola bar, Jason protested. I thought it was some kind of therapy animal. Several students burst into laughter. Even the Selethi made a high-pitched trill that sounded like amusement. Valthax looked ready to combust. It has imprinted. That scent bond is irreversible. It believes he is Pack. Jason slowly turned his head to look at the predator, now resting its head on his boot. Well, that's something. The hatchling emitted a low, satisfied growl, then licked the toe of his boot with a disturbingly warm tongue. Jason made a noise halfway between a gasp and a protest, but didn't move. Valthax stepped forward. The hatchling's ears twitched. It raised its head, then bared its fangs, not at Jason, but at the commander. It growled. Deep. Threatening. The entire room froze again. Do not make sudden movements, Professor Ellen said, raising both arms like she was guiding traffic on a freeway. Let's all remember that this is a learning environment. I will not be challenged by a juvenile beast, Valthax barked. Then maybe don't growl at my shoe, Commander, Jason said. The hatchling chuffed again. It almost sounded like a laugh. Ellen gestured for everyone to stay seated. I believe this presents an excellent opportunity to observe interspecies imprint behavior. Mr. McCullen, if you're willing, we may need to assign you as the temporary guardian for whatever its designation island. Jason looked down at the creature, now resting its head on his leg. You're kidding. The hatchling burped. Not kidding, Ellen said. Valthax was already seething. This is a disgrace, a humiliation to the Dominion. That hatchling was bred to terrify. Jason muttered, Yeah, well, maybe you should have fed it lunch. The hatchling bumped his knee with its snout and let out a soft, happy woof. And that's how Jason McCullen became the accidental alpha of a predator bred for intergalactic intimidation. It started with a granola bar. It continued with a chicken sandwich. By the third day, Jason had come to accept that the hatchling, now referred to by several overly enthusiastic classmates as Nippy, thanks to a brief but memorable incident involving a Furric student's ankle, was no longer a temporary classroom guest. It was a fixture. An unmovable, constantly sniffing, occasionally growling, always attentive fixture. It followed him to comparative ethics, to galactic navigation, and, with increasing enthusiasm, to lunch. Not because it wanted food. Well, not just food. Because it refused to eat unless Jason was eating too. Which had become a problem. It's behavioral reinforcement, Dr. Calvex clicked. Her 8 eyes narrowed with professional suspicion as she watched Jason break a turkey wrap in half and cautiously hand the larger portion to the hatchling, who accepted it with all the gentleness of a monk. You are now the imprint anchor. If you vanish, it could go feral, or, worse, morning aggression. I didn't vanish, Jason said. I was in the bathroom. For 5 minutes. 5 minutes during its feeding window, Calvex said, gesturing at her data pad. It refused nourishment, displayed signs of distress. Threat display toward a maintenance drone. We are not designed for morning predators in enclosed spaces. Jason sighed and took a bite of his half. It's not morning, it's just clingy. The hatchling growled. Loyal, Jason corrected quickly, swallowing. Very loyal. He was now under observation. Not technically confinement, but it was made clear that until a safe way to de-imprint the hatchling was developed, or until it matured out of this attachment phase, he needed to remain accessible. The NCAR delegation was less than pleased. Your softness has corrupted it, Commander Valthax declared during a tense campus council session. That animal was born to instill fear. Well, Jason replied, voice level but tired, maybe it prefers granola bars to fear. The hatchling, lounging behind him like a furry heat-seeking missile, let out a slow, guttural sound that somehow conveyed approval. It hadn't bitten anyone yet, but it had hissed at 3 separate faculty members, ignored every command barked at it in NCAR dialects, and shredded a full-sized intimidation dummy during a demonstration. but only after it noticed Jason watching with mild interest. The dummy had been designed to resemble a timid alien. The hatchling had torn its foam head off and brought it to Jason like a prize. The students were, for the most part, fascinated. Some, like the Silethi, kept a respectful distance. Others saw opportunity. A Marnock student named Prit had attempted to bond with his own snack, offering a gelatin cube infused with nutrient enzymes, but the hatchling ignored it entirely. A week later, Prit was still bitter. "It snubbed my snack," he muttered one afternoon. "Rejected the cube." The cube was fermented for bonding rituals. It also glowed, Jason pointed out. Maybe it didn't want to eat a nightlight. It's tradition. Meanwhile, Jason's daily routine had shifted drastically. He now had to check every doorway before entering to ensure there wasn't a crowd waiting to snap pictures. Even the professors had started structuring parts of their lectures around what the hatchling was doing. If it yawned, half the class yawned. If it sat up, ears twitching, everyone held their breath like the midterms depended on it. In Linguistics 101, it had learned to tap a panel 3 times to request a snack. Jason didn't teach it that. It learned by watching. Worse, it started mimicking his posture. Crossed legs, it curled its tail the same way. Leaned on one elbow, it propped itself up with one forelimb and watched with eerie attentiveness. Professor Ellen was delighted. "This is a breakthrough. Cross-species imprint learning in real time. We've never seen a Coralcar engage in nonverbal social mimicry." Jason grimaced. "I feel like a very tired, very edible role model." At night, things were less funny. The first time he'd tried to sleep without it nearby, the hatchling had paced outside his quarters until the security cams triggered an alert. Now, it slept curled beside his cot, always alert, always twitching an ear at every corridor noise. He'd grown used to the low rumble it made in its sleep. What he hadn't grown used to was the pressure from the in-car. They wanted it back. Not in a gentle, "we miss it" way, in a reconditioning way. "He is undoing years of breeding," Valthax snapped during a closed council meeting. "That creature is destined to serve in the Dominion ranks, not follow a human around like some companion animal." "I didn't ask for it to follow me," Jason said, "and I didn't train it to reject your commands. Maybe you should have asked yourselves why it prefers staying with me instead of your troops. It is malfunctioning." "No," Professor Ellen said, folding her small hands. "It is adapting. You wanted to demonstrate dominance. You've demonstrated that even the most dominant creature will choose comfort and safety over fear if given the option." Jason didn't speak. He was too busy trying to keep the hatchling from chewing on the edge of the table. Still, the point stood. The in-car were furious, the students were enthralled, and Jason was exhausted. He tried, gently a few times, to let it go. One afternoon, he walked it well, walked near it toward the edge of the compound, far from the usual crowds. He sat on a bench under the artificial suns and opened his lunch. "Look, bud," he said, breaking off a chunk of protein bread. "I don't think this is healthy. You're supposed to be learning how to growl and maim and all that. I'm a guy who eats peanut butter with a spoon and hasn't done laundry in a week." The hatchling blinked. He offered it the bread. It didn't take it. Instead, it moved closer and gently nudged his knee with its forehead. Jason froze. "Don't do that," he whispered. "You're not a dog." The hatchling closed its eyes for a moment, resting against him. Jason sighed. Somewhere, distantly, the security cams buzzed. He knew they were watching. "They're going to take you back," he murmured, "sooner or later." The hatchling didn't move. "You should bite me, growl, something." It thumped its tail once. Then, with an almost bored air, flopped onto its side and rolled until it was nearly under the bench. Jason chuckled, despite himself. This was not how xenocultural exchanges were supposed to go. But somehow, the scariest thing in the room had picked the softest option, and refused to let go. Jason didn't want to call it a custody battle, but when you're sitting at a round table with 4 species, 3 military envoys, 1 stubborn academic, and a hatchling currently chewing through the leg of a chair beside you, the word starts to feel accurate. "The imprint must be severed," Commander Valthax growled for the 5th time that hour. "Every moment it spends under human influence, it forgets its role in the Dominion. We are losing an asset." Professor Ellen adjusted her glasses and spoke with careful neutrality. "I would argue you're witnessing a redefinition of that role. This so-called asset is showing emotional intelligence, social patterning, and empathy, all signs of higher cognitive potential. Isn't that worth studying? It was never meant to think, Valthax snapped. It was meant to follow. The hatchling paused its chewing and looked up, muzzle twitching. Jason instinctively dropped a piece of synth meat under the table. The hatchling caught it mid-air and resumed its gnawing with a soft growl. It had gained almost 5 pounds since its arrival. Its musculature was developing fast, faster than anyone expected. The sharp teeth were now complemented by bone-deep strength, and more than once, Jason had woken to the sound of it dragging something heavy into his room furniture, food bins, once an entire cleaning drone. He was now the subject of at least 3 ongoing research papers, one studying human Koralkar bonding behavior, another investigating non-verbal pack leadership dynamics, and one from a furric scholar titled Snacks as Social Catalyst, a study in cross-species nutrition-based affinity. The worst part? Jason had gotten used to it, used to the low thrum of its breathing at night, the way it paced beside him between classes, the reflexive way he now reached into his bag before sitting down, pulling out a snack for both of them. Used to being followed, watched, trusted. So, when the proposal came informal, stamped, worded with bureaucratic cruelty, he felt the burn of it like ice down the spine. The Dominion had authorized a controlled de-imprinting procedure. They were going to break the bond. Legally, he couldn't stop it. Medically, it was risky. Jason read through the file twice. The de-imprinting involved sensory reconditioning loud noises, scent neutralizers, brief isolation, repeated exposure to new handlers. They framed it clinically, dispassionately. Jason saw it for what it was, psychological whiplash. Will it hurt it? He asked quietly after the meeting. Professor Ellen hesitated. It may cause distress. The Koralkar are neurologically sensitive during this phase. Forced reprogramming could lead to long-term confusion, aggression, or withdrawal. Jason rubbed a hand over his face. So basically, we'd be scrambling its head so it acts like a proper monster again. It's a cultural expectation, she said gently. To them, this is restoration. He didn't sleep much that night. The hatchling curled beside him, as always, warm and quiet. Jason stayed awake, listening to its breathing, the hum of the vents, the faint crackling of its skin as it shifted, adjusting to a more comfortable angle. Morning came, and with it, guards. They brought a transport crate, reinforced, sealed. Jason stood between them and the hatchling without thinking. You're not going to scare it back into being something it doesn't want to be. Valthax stepped forward. You think it wants this? It is an animal. It follows its needs. You are its need. Jason shook his head. No, it made a choice. You don't get to take that away just because it doesn't fit your power narrative. Professor Ellen intervened before things escalated. Let us try something first. A compromise. They agreed reluctantly to a monitored test. Jason would leave for 24 hours. No contact. No voice, no scent, nothing. The hatchling would be placed in a controlled environment with trained NCAR handlers, given stimuli to bond with them instead. If successful, the de-imprinting would continue. If not, they'd reconsider. Jason didn't get to say goodbye. They took the hatchling while it was asleep, sedated with a soft nerve mist. He only saw its head slump as the crate sealed. He didn't speak, didn't trust himself to. The next day was hollow. He walked the campus in silence. Every glance felt heavier. Even the Salithi students seemed muted, like the absence was gravitational. No growls, no tail slapping against his chair, no alert posture. Just quiet. By hour 12, he was pacing. By hour 18, he was at the observation chamber. They let him watch. The hatchling was curled in the corner. The handlers tried everything, scent imprint pads, live prey simulations, even vocal mimicry of Jason's voice. Nothing worked. It wouldn't eat, wouldn't respond. When one of the handlers reached in with a training prod, it growled, but not with dominance, with warning. By hour 21, it began pacing, searching corners, making low, pained sounds. At hour 23, it stopped responding to the environment entirely. Jason turned to Ellen. That's not behavioral adjustment, that's a breakdown. She didn't disagree. At hour 24, they opened the chamber. Jason stepped in. The hatchling didn't move at first. Then its ears twitched. It turned. its eyes locked onto him, like it had never seen him before. He knelt. Slowly. "Hey, bud." It didn't run. It launched. Straight into him, bowling him over with a heavy thud. Not claws, not teeth, just weight, pressing close, trembling. It made a keening sound, low and raw, something Jason had never heard before. He wrapped his arms around it without hesitation. "It's okay, I'm here." The hatchling pressed its snout into his chest, and for the first time, made a noise that could only be described as sobbing. After a long moment, Baltax muttered behind the glass, "It will never be one of ours again." "No," Professor Ellen replied, "it's something new." And Jason, holding the creature that had once been bred to terrify, realized something else. It wasn't just about food, or scent, or survival. It was about trust. Real, bone-deep trust. That wasn't something you could program. And it definitely wasn't something you could take away. 2 weeks after the failed de-imprinting attempt, the hatchling officially received a name. Not a label, not a unit code. An actual name. The council tried to name it Specimen 47 Delta. The students held a vote instead. They picked Echo. Jason didn't know whether to be honored or terrified. Echo had grown another 4 inches since the crate incident. Its limbs were filling out, its movements smoother now, more deliberate. The bone ridges along its spine had begun to rise in maturity, which, according to the only Dominion biologist willing to share field notes, meant it was entering the early adolescent phase. Which also meant danger. Not because of aggression, because of loyalty. "You must understand," Cal Vex explained during a closed advisory meeting. "Corralcar, in this phase, will bond permanently to a chosen alpha. If that imprint solidifies, breaking it later may cause irreversible psychological harm." Jason looked at the wall instead of at anyone. He already knew what that meant. The Inkar had stopped pushing, but only because they realized they'd lost the battle. The hatchling wasn't theirs anymore. That didn't mean they were happy about it. Valthax hadn't spoken to Jason directly since the retrieval incident. Not even when Echo, during a silent standoff in the cafeteria, walked over to Valthax's table, sniffed his food tray, and gently knocked it to the floor without breaking eye contact. Jason had tried to apologize. The commander had just walked away. And yet, everything else, lectures, student activity, observational studies, had moved on, slowly, grudgingly, but moved on nonetheless. Some students stopped being afraid, some didn't, but the sheer presence of Echo at Jason's side had reshaped the way people thought about the Dominion's model of control. And the Dominion didn't like that. "You should know," Professor Ellen said one evening. "The Dominion councils dispatched a new oversight envoy, not military, cultural. They're saying it's to assess the implications of the imprint." Jason let his eyes close for a long moment. "They're going to try to take him again. They're going to try to decide if he's recoverable," she said. Which means the same thing. Ellen didn't argue. The envoy arrived a week later. Polished, cold, humanoid in form but flanked by 2 Inkar aides, she introduced herself as Ambassador Rowe, and she didn't shake hands. Her first act was to observe Jason and Echo during a live session. "They move in synchrony," she noted. "Does it understand verbal commands?" "It understands tone," Jason said. "Words? A few, mostly routines. You can see patterns." "Can you give it an order?" "I don't give orders, I ask." She didn't blink. "Ask then." Jason crouched beside Echo. "Hey, sit." Echo sat. Tap. It tapped the floor with its right forepaw. Rowe nodded once. "Obedient." Jason frowned. "Willing." She looked down her nose at him. "Semantics." Echo, as if sensing the tension, stood up and moved between them. Not aggressive, just present. Rowe's expression tightened. They kept her visit short. She left without any overt conflict. But 3 days later, the letter arrived. Transfer recommendation approved. They decided Echo would be relocated to a Dominion re-education center, where his behavior would be monitored and, if necessary, realigned to proper function. Jason stood in front of the advisory board, holding the letter in his hand. "He's not a weapon." "He was," came the answer. "He's not now." Ellen leaned forward. "There's precedent for this. He's formed a social bond, a non-hierarchical one, that contradicts Dominion breeding protocol, but it aligns with ethical standards of developmental autonomy." Rowe's voice came through the comm link. She wasn't even in the room. That animal belongs to us. Jason looked straight at the camera. Not anymore. Silence. Then, from behind him, a soft growl. Echo had followed him into the room. No leash, no prompting. He padded in quietly and curled up beside Jason's chair, eyes alert, body relaxed. A few of the board members flinched. Roe didn't react. Jason kept his voice calm. He made a choice. The final decision took 48 hours. 48 hours of statements, data reviews, ethics clauses, and cultural exemptions. Then, a verdict. Echo would not be returned. But he would be observed, permanently classified as a non-aligned entity under Galactic Cross-Educational Research Protocol. Meaning, he stayed with Jason. As long as Jason stayed in the program. He was now officially responsible for a growing apex predator who thought peanut butter cups were currency. By the end of the semester, things looked different. Echo had stopped following Jason to class. Not because he was less loyal, because he knew where to wait. He'd curl in the shade outside the building, tail thumping when Jason emerged. Occasionally, another student would try to approach, and Echo would allow it briefly. Then he'd look to Jason for approval. A nod, a hum, sometimes just a raised eyebrow. That was enough. And slowly, the others came around. The Trallebeck twins began leaving dried fruit near Echo's resting mat. One of the Selethi students painted a mural of him on the campus wall, abstract, colorful, full of wild motion. Even Pritt, still wounded about his gelatin cube, tried again, this time with dried meat strips. Echo accepted the offering, barely. Jason smiled more. He slept better. He stopped wondering when the Ngenkar would come for him again. Because they didn't. They'd stopped fighting something they couldn't explain. And Echo grew. Stronger. Smarter. Never violent. Just present. He started responding to names in the 3rd month. Could differentiate between students. Would rest beside those who were anxious, sometimes pressing his body close enough to slow their pulse. He'd grown into something else. Not a weapon. Not a tool. Something with agency. The class began to understand that. Even the Nukar, in their own way, began to adjust. The Dominion delegation never formally apologized, but by the next exchange summit, they arrived without a single intimidation demonstration. They brought food instead. Jason didn't say anything. Echo accepted a dried bone, and then ignored the rest of the delegation completely. One evening, Jason sat beneath the synthetic stars of the campus courtyard, legs stretched, backpack half unzipped beside him. Echo lay nearby, not asleep, but close. Jason reached into the pack and pulled out a granola bar, the same kind as before, the one that started everything. He broke it in half. Held one piece out. Echo leaned forward, took it gently, then nudged Jason's hand before settling back into place. Jason smiled. He didn't need to say anything. Because sometimes, the real strength wasn't in teeth or growls or dominance. It was in choosing peace when you were bred for war. In sitting still beside someone who offered you a snack. And deciding that was enough.